right. Hello, this is Eric Wilkie and Joel Betts and Ahmad Gaber and from Norbert Health. So, just a quick background. I'll tell where we got started. I'm going to pick on our guest here, but I went to HIMSS, which is the Health Information Management Society, and saw a lot of interesting tech. Obviously, AI is huge these days. That was probably half the booths. But in the emerging technology section, there was a device, I don't know, maybe 4 by 4 inches, 5 by 5 inches, not much bigger than that. It was on a stand, and you walk up, and it would do almost a complete set of vitals within just a few seconds without even touching you. Like I did a cross check with my Apple Watch, and looked at the pulse rate and everything, and so that was pretty fascinating, especially coming out of the pandemic. Obviously there's the thought on how that would work in a contagion setting, but from an ER perspective, just triaging ways to be more efficient. So anyways, that's how I came across Norbert Health, but I'm going to just turn it over to you for a little bit and let you introduce yourself.
Thank you. Great to be with you guys on this Friday afternoon. My name is Ahmad Gaber. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Norbert Health. I am a repeat founder of healthcare companies myself, and I'm relatively new to the Norbert team. I came across their technology as well, and I had and continue to have a very ingrained thesis inside around the right intersection between really effective hardware and the platforms that sit on top of that hardware, and how the combination of those two things in healthcare could actually make some really robust change, both on things that we consider very core, regardless of what kind of healthcare setting we're talking about, whether it's a hospital setting or at home or oncology infusion center or what have you. But it's the combination of these two things together that can really drive a lot of meaningful change. So I'm excited to be with you guys.
So awesome. So how did this technology sort of come to be?
Yeah. So our founder, Alex Winter, is a vision tech guy, essentially. So he comes from outside of healthcare, but he has also established and founded and exited several companies in the vision tech space. And so they have really, really, really deep expertise around what kind of hardware and sensors need to be able to put together and the algorithms that wrap around them to deliver very interesting things. And they, several years ago, so I think we're probably talking 4 or 5 years ago, they established a thesis around what can we do inside of healthcare with a combination of some really sophisticated hardware and some really advanced algorithm based upon the experience that they've had, for him, the prior 20 years. And so, lots of R&D, lots of iteration, and it kind of brings us to where we are today, where we have a fully functioning product that's about to be mass produced.
So the current iteration, what are all the vitals that it can measure, contactless?
Yeah. So the core 5, pulse, SpO2, pulse rate, respiration rate, blood pressure, and then there's a string of others as well that we are going to bring to market.
So everybody's probably scratching the head and be like, all right, without touching a patient, how in the world do you measure SpO2 and BP?
Yeah, we have a combination of sensors inside the hardware. So we have indirect sensors. There's a radar unit. There's cameras. There's thermal cameras. We measure a variety of things using a combination of those sensors, and then the algorithms bring together that data and essentially establish a score for each one of those vitals. But the science, what is it that we measure, right? We measure things on the face, we measure things on the palm. We're able to detect specific markers color change, things like that underneath the surface of the skin, and do it in a way that is accurate and medical grade.
Wow. So when I was at HIMSS, the blood pressure was not commercially available yet. Is it out now?
Well, commercially available, as the commercial officer, I have to be super clear. Commercially available is only going to happen because we're a medical grade device. So, we're going through FDA approvals, European Union approvals, getting a CE mark. So commercially available means when each one of those vital signs is certified by the regulatory agency. In terms of does it work, the vitals work. And so, the research is done, our studies are, for some of the vitals, we have studies that continue to go on, but we figured out how to do all of the vitals.
So if I got a device, is all the tech in it and it just gets turned on as the FDA approves each one?
Exactly.
So buying one today, I'm not obsolete.
100%. And actually, it's not just the core vitals that we're talking about. It's additional components as well that we can actually derive from the same set of sensors and the hardware that's in there. And that will continue to happen. And so some of those things are a little bit, some are less complicated to get clearance for. So for example, getting FDA approval for blood pressure is very, very, very complex. It's hard to figure out how to do it, and it's really hard to get it cleared through the FDA as well. But there are other things that, it really depends on how the FDA or the regulatory agency wants to be able to validate its accuracy. But for the core vitals, they're pretty stringent, and rightfully so, right? I mean, these are the kinds of devices that we're going to be used to in all care settings at the home in the future. The days where we have multiple devices to measure your blood pressure or your temperature, things like that, those are very, very rapidly going to be behind us. We're just going to have one device and you don't even need to touch it.
So what are the limitations to getting an accurate set of vitals with the device?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, there's I'm always very impressed with the team because there are some times where I assume that something is just not possible, and they'll say, it's possible. We haven't invested the time and money yet, but we think we can figure that specific thing out. But there are some things today that I could say are limitations that out of the box today that we're going to have to face. So for example, we can't take a reading from 15 feet today, for example. It has to be within 3 feet. Although we are going to push the distance further and further and further, and there's use cases behind why that would be important. Lighting is important. So the lighting that we all have right now is sufficient, but if it's a really, really low light environment, that makes it a little bit harder. Again, that being said, we're working on being able to make sure that's the case, that we can do it where there is low lighting situations, and they exist inside of healthcare. Big time movement, right? So we're measuring the face and the hand. If somebody is moving their head around consistently, it's going to tell them stop moving, pause, and wait until they stabilize for it to continue doing the readings. Now the readings are quick, right? We're doing it, we say in under 30 seconds, but typically it takes less than 20 seconds today. And we're going to drive time down even further from that. But those are the main kind of physical barriers. Now, with things like skin pigmentation, I sometimes wear glasses, things like that. Those are not limitations. So it is medical grade for all ethnicities, all skin types, all things like that.
Yeah. So my experience was, I didn't say completely rigid still. There's a little bit of motion, and it wasn't even 20 seconds.
Yeah.
Again, but it was minus the blood pressure piece. But although maybe it did it, but it just didn't display it.
Yeah. So that's the other part that's actually, I think some people, when you start really wrapping your head around what these kinds of advancements mean, If you go into a doctor's office today and they're going to take 4 vitals, they're going to do them one after the other, or maybe they'll do 2 at the same time, right? And that takes an X amount of minutes to do. People kind of take for granted that maybe it's 5 minutes, 6 minutes. The average is 6.5 minutes in a clinical setting to be able to do the full vitals. And that excludes, sanitization of things, basically restarting the process for the next patient. But if we can do it, like you said, Eric, in 20 seconds, which we do, that saves a ton of time, right? And if we see 100 patients in a clinic in a day, we're essentially saving about 10 hours of work time just from making sure that the vitals are that much faster and that much more automated. The other component that's important is we get all of the vitals contemporaneously. And that's valuable because we're essentially starting to get data points, a series of data points for a specific individual in one period of time, not in a distributed amount of time. And we can do them really, really quickly. And that reliability of that data and the breadth of that data starts to become really, really interesting. Most people can't say that they can get 4/5/8 readings, 8 metrics of valuable healthcare information at the same time in less than 30 seconds.
And so you hinted at a variety of other things that you're looking to measure.
Yeah.
What,
yeah. There's some things like detecting AFib, for example. That's not necessarily a core vital, but we have the capability of being able to do that. We can detect motion anomalies, whether that be fall risk, motion degradation, so things that are more related to potentially musculoskeletal issues or musculoskeletal implications from another chronic disease or another kind of disease state. These are kind of compounded metrics or vitals, more advanced vitals that we're also going to be able to deliver to people as a package. So there's the days of just having dumb vitals, and now we're going into even the core vitals are smarter, but there's compounded vitals that we are also going to start applying on top of. And that's valuable to some people more than others, but it's also very, very specific to the clinical objective. I mean, if we're taking care of a patient population that is, this is a cardiovascular outpatient surgery center. They do implants, they do whatever it is that they do, right? The patient population that they treat is mainly folks that have cardiovascular disease, and they want to apply the Norbert device for a post-procedure monitoring program, or they want to have it inside of, the clinic visits, things like that. These modules that we can apply specifically for that cardiovascular group, or people who are, in that space, or a nephrology clinic or what have you. It really starts to upgrade the level of insights that they have. And it's all derived from one device.
You also forgive me, but I always wonder, like I'm looking at it thinking, okay, how would this affect my next shift in the ER? And as complex as medicine gets, I think most of us back down to the idea that if there's some vital sign abnormalities that need to be addressed, that takes precedence over everything else. I mean, and so, right when they hit the door, if they have vital sign abnormalities, that's going to push them right to the top of the list of patients to be seen.
Right.
But further past that, I remember learning about a study when I was in residency about they were following patients that were presumably misdiagnosed or something was missed, and they ended up passing away within 7 days of discharge from the ER. And they were trying to find some common thread there. And they went through and reviewed all these different, hundreds of cases. And what they found was vital sign abnormalities on discharge was the #1 predictor of unanticipated death after discharge. And I thought, okay, that just resonated with me. And I thought, okay, that's something that we need to keep a really close eye on. So I think the upfront vital signs, that's huge. But I see this as in the ER, like, hey, we're getting ready to discharge you. Let's scan you real quick, make sure you're still doing good, and then we'll get you out of here. If something pops up abnormal, like, you better rethink that whole patient interaction,
100%. In the facility and outside of the facility. I mean, that concept, the continuum of that care and that monitoring becomes a lot simpler to be able to do with automated devices like ours. Right? You can't really rely on an elderly patient to give you 4 sets of readings 4 times a day for the next 10 days, for example. It's too much, right? But if you basically tell them, just sit in front of this device and it's going to just do it all for you. And all you got to do is pose as if you're posing in front of the camera, right? That becomes a lot more reliable. And you don't have to be worried about, well, did they put the blood pressure cuff on the right way? All of those kinds of things. The reliability there just increases, tenfold.
Yeah. Now imagine, with a smarter device rather than, just off the wall blood pressure cuff, will it do things like shock index, where you take pulse divided by systolic blood pressure, and so if it's a greater than 0.7, you got to start worrying about unrecognized shock states. So
yeah, I mean, the raw data is all being collected, right? So as part of some of these modules, some of the high frequency indexes, I call them, these clinical indexes, we can put those forward. But if somebody wants to build their own, and maybe like you guys have your own sophisticated EHR, and you have built it in a way where there are specific things that you want to be able to see. You want to make sure that kind of a metric is channeling into your EHR automatically. You'll be able to do that.
Wow. All right, so I imagine some people are thinking, okay, this sounds great, maybe too good to be true, but I bet it cost $1 bajillion.
No, I mean, if we did that, we wouldn't sell any product, right? So we think about the market a couple of different ways. So we think about your big provider ecosystem, and by the way, we think about this globally. So it's not just a US-centric product. We think about the provider ecosystem. So, like I said before, inpatient, outpatient, acute care, secondary care, what have you, skilled nursing facilities, everywhere where the full spectrum of what we would consider as the provider space. And then we think about health at home and all of the applications of bringing more health into the home, whether that is, again, more specific chronic disease management because somebody's taking on a value-based care mandate, or just, a specific post-procedure discharge monitoring or aging at home or what have you. So health at home. And then there's the applications around drug discovery, clinical trials, centralized trials, where again, it's very costly to have to ensure that my trial site has this medical supervision, because we want to ensure that the data is actually accurate, but also coming in reliably. And if we want to do more distribution of that, and the drug discovery pipeline right now is as fat as it has ever been in the history of mankind because of all of the AI advances. Right. So being able to make sure that we have these things is super valuable. We appreciate the fact that the application of this is really big, and we want to make sure that everybody gets the opportunity to utilize it. So from a pricing perspective, we're not going to price it where it's like this really bespoke, complex medical device that we're planning on building a ton of these.
Well, that's good news. Because I would like one. I want you to put them in triage, put them on all the exam rooms. Like, is it going to be affordable enough that we could do that? We could have a couple in triage and one in each of the exam rooms, and it's like the hospital's not going to flip out of the capital expenditure. And
totally. You can. So we're going to have our first 2 indications certified hopefully this year by the FDA, which are going to be EP-002 and pulse rate. And at that, and we're already contracted with a large contract manufacturer. The production process is about to begin. So we are We are offering early access to folks that want to reserve it because as we scale up, there may be, tightening of supply, although we don't want to run into that problem. But if people, if someone's listening and they want to be able to have it first, they can certainly do that and go to our website. But in terms of procurement for classic procurement processes of any kind of customer group, we're going to sell it the way that people typically buy medical devices currently. So it'll be available through your group purchasing organization contracts. It'll be available through distributors. You can potentially buy it directly from us if that's the way that you would prefer to purchase. But a freestanding ED, this is not gonna break their bank.
Can I get it on Amazon?
We're probably not gonna.
All right, so you mentioned that. So what is the website? If people are like, this sounds pretty cool, I want to go snoop around.
It's norberthealth.com. NORBERT health.com.
All right, and so you're anticipating 2023 EP-002 and pulse rate.
Yep.
And then what's the anticipated rollout for the rest of them?
They happen in phases, one after the next, into 2024.
Okay. But by end of 2024, you think you'll have full FDA?
Our hope is by the end of 2024, we will have the full package of core vitals FDA approved and ready to go for everybody.
All right. And then you mentioned sort of fall detection. So obviously falls in the ER is an issue, but our suicidal ideation patients, or you try and put them in rooms that are safe. Could this device basically give us an alert if there's unusual motion that let's go check on them a little bit more frequently?
Yeah, this is the part that actually gets us really excited around how do we enable use cases and the ability to monitor for specific kinds of things that we want to be able to look at that we're not even anticipating. And how can we give our partners the ability to do that as well? Now, again, there's the balance of some of these indications, depending on how we deliver it through the device. So, for example, if we're telling somebody this is your blood pressure, that has to be regulatorily approved. Some of the other insights, there's varying degrees of regulatory scrutiny around how we establish those things. But we want to be able to our goal is not to say, here's 4 or 5 vitals and we're good with that. Our goal is to say, here's the core, and we're going to build on top of the core and just keep building and keep building.
All right. And Joel, I don't want to dominate and so make sure you get any questions you have, but there's one that I'm kind of curious about. Do you have AI as part of the system? And if you did, what is the FDA approval been like because this is kind of hot off the presses. It's new. It's exploding. I think it's going to be hard to regulate the speed of development that's happening. So I'm just kind of curious to see what that's been like.
Yeah. I'll try and thoughtfully answer that question. So yes, there is intelligence in our capability. Different than like ChatGPT, for example, where you don't know what it's about to give you as a response, and you're putting in a prompt and it's kind of wide open, and it could potentially give you a different answer if you ask the question just a little bit differently or tell it to regenerate. Right? It's going through these models, and really there isn't a lot of control around what's the output going to be. Our intelligence, because for regulatory approval, it has to be reliable the same way every time forever, basically, right? And so when we get certified, the certification is that this metric that you are producing, it meets clinical standards, it is clinical grade, and here's the stamp of approval, and there is not going to be any kind of negative output that could potentially come from it that we weren't anticipating because your AI is doing something that we didn't really foresee as a regulator.
Yeah.
Some of our more contemporary applications of the product in the future, the things that build on top of this core, they may be running into that kind of an environment. And I mean, we're paying attention to it just like everybody else is. What are the regulators going to do? What scope are we going to be allowed in delivering things? But also, we think about it before we even submit it to a regulator. Is this ready? Is this medical grade? Is it ready? Right.
Well, it's kind of, I think this is a fascinating time that we're living in, right, with all this, because I know of some doctors that type up their cases and put it in Chat GPT. I don't know if they're adjusting the temperature, for consistent output or whatever, but they're using it currently. Now, obviously, it's not, the physician's still making the decision and using this, as guidance and not written on stone tablets, from the mountain. But I just thought it was an interesting, discourse of what's happening today. Like, people are using this technology in a clinical setting for something that wasn't really built for a clinical setting necessarily. But
right. I think my personal opinion is we're going to probably have some bad examples of things going wrong. But there's going to be a lot of really positive applications of it.
Yeah. I think it's a fascinating time to be alive.
100%. And the speed at which people are able to take these ideas, when I had my primary care chain, we would have some really novel ideas, but the engineering of being able to deliver those things and implement them into a workflow, it's just, some things would just be too overwhelming. It's too difficult to do.
Yeah.
And today, some of these things go from ideation to, production in days, which is incredible.
Yeah. Well, and we're getting deep in the weeds and off topic, but having done some work in different parts of the world that have a lot more limited medical access, and Joel, you did that not too long ago as well. A device like this, and post-op care. I'm just thinking of where I would have loved to have this. That in conjunction with the AI assistance for, just contemporary medical knowledge and like the availability for that could be ubiquitous around the globe. And then you've got things like Starlink where you got internet anywhere you want. So it's crazy.
The healthcare pressures that globally people are seeing are, they'll continue to get harder and harder. Unfortunately, we have more chronic disease in more areas of the world. The world generally has a more aging population. And, the more we dig into market by market, we see that everybody has nursing shortages, right? Like the two sides of these things are not getting better. We have more needs and less people to be able to take care of it. So we have to figure out a way to bridge that divide.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right, Joel, you got anything?
One of the things that we've recently incorporated at our hospital system that are working on expanding is using telemetry for triage. And I could see this just dovetailing very nicely with that, where, because vital signs are such a critical component of the triage process. And, it's one thing when you've got 10 people checking in, but if you've got one or two of those that have got a heart rate of 140, you got, people, and if you know that right away, 20, 30 seconds in, and you say, hey, come here, this will scan you. I mean, that to me is a huge potential.
Yeah.
So we have hospital partner pilots that are looking specifically at that use case. And let me paint a vision for you that may not be that far away in the future, but instead of having, it is pretty much automated today, right? And we can tag a vital to a person without having to identify who the person is. We can say that person, these were their sets of vitals, so we can enhance the triage process. But in the not so distant future, that step of even having to step up to a station to get your vitals may not even be necessary. We are figuring out not necessarily the technology capability to do that, because we know how to do it. It's kind of more just the workflow applications and how do we make everybody feel comfortable with how we deploy it is, you have people that come into an ED waiting room, or you even go into a primary care or an urgent care waiting room and you're sitting down. We can start to tag vitals on people and, establish an average of what is their true vital. So gone are the days of, white coat syndrome for blood pressure, for example, right? Because I didn't take your blood pressure once when you just sat down after walking from the waiting area and maybe you're a little bit out of breath and you have white coat syndrome because you're sitting and you're worried. I've actually taken it 4 times already, and I've averaged it out, and this is actually what your true blood pressure is.
Yeah.
So there's no friction in the process anymore.
Yeah, can you imagine?
That's interesting.
You got a waiting room with, say, 20, 30 people in it, and you get an alert. Hey, there's somebody out there who just went into AFib.
Yeah.
This is not the future. This is what we're doing right now.
That's cool.
Yeah, we hear these horror stories once in a while that come up on the news about someone that passed away in a waiting room in an ER somewhere, or and you worry about that, because if we've got, and this isn't so much a problem where we work now, but some of these larger systems, they'll have people out there for hours. Mm-hmm. And if you blood pressure's dropping or heart rate's going up or, whatever, it's like, you don't know that. I worked in a system for a while where the average wait was about 3.5 hours. Yep. And these were, a lot of these were elderly patients. And I would start having anxiety before my shift, eating dinner with my family before going in, thinking, is anyone going into AFib in the waiting room, or whatever right now?
Or imagine sepsis screening. Like you'll have temperature and heart rate and blood pressure.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
The idea, our goal in the future is, we call it contactless vitals monitoring today. Our future moniker is going to be ambient sensing.
Right.
So whether it's in whatever environment that you want to be able to roll it out into, this is ambient sensing.
Man, hurry up, would you?
We're going pretty quick. I don't want to throw the regulators under the bus, but they have very, very stringent processes.
Yeah, my brother and I had a company that did. We were one of the, I think, earliest ones that I could think of that did clinical trial data over the internet collection.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, the FDA regulations are significant. And I totally get it. Like they need to be, but it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
So, all right, Ahmed, I really appreciate the time. I promised you that I'd just talk to you for 30 minutes, but I went long, so it's kind of exciting.
Pleasure speaking with you both.
All right. Again, so it's norberthealth.com, and I'm gonna be anxiously watching.
Yeah, let you know exactly when you can get your set of devices.
That's perfect. I'm ready.
Awesome. Looking forward to it.
All right, guys.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thanks again.
All right. Thanks.
Bye.
Appreciate it.
Bye.